Welcome to Life Stories, where real emotions, quiet courage, and the power of love take center stage. In today's story, we follow a single mother and her daughter as they navigate a holiday filled with painful memories, silent strength, and a truth that changes everything. Set against the backdrop of a seemingly perfect family gathering, this is a journey of standing tall, choosing empathy, and redefining what it truly means to belong. Subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's heartfelt journey, one that reminds us all that family isn't about perfection, but about love, truth, and resilience. The wind had turned colder in Chicago, and the sky outside my apartment window was already darkening into a dusky mauve. The rush of the season had begun: paper turkeys in shop windows, emails about Black Friday sales, and the ever present hum of people preparing for Thanksgiving. But inside our apartment, there was only the soft scratch of pencil on paper and the rustle of my daughter's notebook as she tried to make sense of her math assignment. "Mom, I don't understand this part," Sophie said, her voice uncertain, tinged with quiet frustration. I blinked, my eyes adjusting from the spreadsheet I had just closed on my work laptop. The numbers were starting to blur into each other these days. Too many late nights, too many deadlines. I rubbed my temples and moved toward the dining table where Sophie sat. At 13, she had a quiet, observant nature, too mature for her age sometimes. Her long hair was pulled into a loose braid, and she looked at me not just as a child seeking help, but as someone deeply aware of the distance life had sometimes placed between us. "Let's take a look," I said, my voice softer than I felt. I leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the algebra problem that had her stuck. This one. You can solve it by subtracting the same number from both sides. Like this. I began to write, gently walking her through it. Our days had become a kind of delicate dance. I was constantly trying to balance the demands of being a senior accountant at a competitive firm with the deeper responsibility of raising my daughter alone. Since the divorce, 5 years had passed. Sophie's father, Charles, had moved to California for work and now saw her maybe once a year, if that. There were no dramatic fights, no messy custody battles, just a slow, fading absence that I carried on my shoulders like another unspoken job title. As I stood to begin preparing dinner, the phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I hesitated to answer. "Hello, Mother," I said, already bracing myself. "Emily, thank goodness. I was just going over the checklist for tomorrow's charity event." My mother, Margaret Sanders, sounded polished, composed. Her voice always did. "But I wanted to talk about Thanksgiving. You are coming this year, aren't you?" I looked out the window again. The city lights blinked to life beneath the violet sky. "I haven't decided yet. Work has been hectic." There was a pause, a familiar pause. "That excuse again?" she said, and the edge in her voice was unmistakable. "Emily, have you thought about how disappointed your grandmother will be if you're not there? Especially this year. Her health's been declining." I closed my eyes. Margaret had always been more concerned with appearances than feelings. To her, I was the imperfect daughter, the one who studied art in college before turning to accounting, the one who didn't marry well, who didn't stay married at all. My younger sister, Rebecca, had taken the role Margaret adored. Elegant, successful, married to a prominent lawyer, living in a house that appeared in lifestyle magazines. "I'll think about it," I murmured. When I hung up, Sophie was standing in the hallway. "Grandma," she asked, her voice small, "are we going to that house again?" I hesitated. "I don't know yet, sweetheart." Her eyes dropped to the floor. I knew what she was remembering. The way Rebecca's children would whisper about her clothes. The way Margaret's compliments never included either of us. The way it felt like we didn't belong. I began, choosing my words carefully. "Grandma Grace isn't feeling well. This might be her last Thanksgiving." Sophie didn't answer. She didn't need to. I could see the answer in the way she bit her lip and nodded slowly. Grace was the only one who had ever made us feel truly welcome. My grandmother, sharp-eyed, deeply intuitive, had always been a quiet ally. She'd taught literature for 30 years and never missed a detail, in books or in people. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, I pulled out an old photo album. There was Grace in her youth, standing before a chalkboard with her arms crossed, eyes full of resolve. She'd never said much, but when she did, it mattered. She had been my compass growing up. And now I could feel her pulling me again, gently but firmly, towards something I wasn't yet ready to name. The next morning, I picked up the phone and called her. "Grandma Grace," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "Sophie and I will come to Thanksgiving." There was a long pause, then a warmth in her voice that wrapped around me like a soft scarf. "Oh, Emily, that's wonderful. I'm so looking forward to seeing you both." And then she said, with the kind of quiet weight that only she could carry, "Sometimes family is more complicated than we think, but what matters most is truth and courage. Don't forget that." I sat holding the phone, the city waking up outside my window. I didn't know what was waiting for me at that table or what it would cost. But I knew I had to go. For Sophie, for Grace, and maybe even for myself. We arrived at my mother's house just before dusk on Thanksgiving Day. The grand brick mansion in Oak Park looked exactly as I remembered it, immaculate, adorned with seasonal wreaths and intimidating in its perfection. Sophie held my hand tightly as we stood on the porch. I could feel her trembling. I smiled at her, though my own heart was thudding against my ribs. "Smile," I whispered, squeezing her hand. "No matter what happens, I'm right beside you." The door opened, and there stood Margaret. Her navy dress was crisp, her hair perfectly styled as always. "Emily. Sophie." She gave us a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You've finally arrived. Everyone else is already inside." I handed her the pumpkin pie. "It's homemade." She accepted it with a faint frown. "We have plenty of desserts, but thank you." Inside, the house was filled with voices, laughter, and the delicate clinking of glassware. My sister Rebecca stood near the fireplace, wearing a designer coat and a gleaming new necklace. Her two children darted between rooms while her husband chatted with another relative. "Emily. Sophie." Rebecca's voice rang out, bright but cool. Her eyes scanned us with quick, calculating precision. "Thanksgiving shopping, was it?" I nodded. "I made pumpkin pie." Rebecca gave a light laugh. "Oh, how charming. I had mine delivered from the gourmet store. Saves so much time." She reached out and touched the sleeve of my sweater. "You should buy yourself something nice once in a while, Emily. And Sophie, dear, isn't that uniform a bit too big for you?" Sophie flushed. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "We were just about to replace it," I said, my voice calm. "It'll be ready for today." "Good," Rebecca replied. "You know how particular Mom is about appearances at the table." The tension thickened like the scent of cinnamon in the air. But then I heard the voice I'd been waiting for. "Emily. Sophie." Grandma Grace was seated in the armchair near the window, her cane beside her. Her face looked thinner than before, but her eyes still held that spark of clarity and quiet fire. "Grandma?" I leaned down and kissed her cheek, and Sophie followed, her hand resting gently on Grace's shoulder. "I'm so glad you both came," Grace said softly, holding our hands in hers. "I've had them prepare special seats next to me." As we entered the dining room, the long table glistened with silver cutlery and white porcelain. The turkey was set like a crown jewel in the center. Everyone took their seats. Grace tapped her cane gently. "Emily, Sophie, come. You're next to me." But as we sat down, something felt off. Every plate was accompanied by silverware, except ours. "Excuse me," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "It seems we don't have forks and knives." A hush fell over the table. Margaret blinked, then gave a shrug. "Oh my, I must have forgotten. Just a little oversight. You can eat with your hands, can't you?" Laughter flickered from Rebecca. "Suits Sophie just fine. Like a little puppy." Sophie's face crumpled. Her hands hovered over the food, trembling. Around the table, eyes darted away, some filled with pity, others with awkward silence. I felt my blood go cold. But before I could speak, I noticed Grace giving me a subtle nod. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes told me to look, beneath the table. I reached down and found a small cloth bag hidden discreetly near my chair. Inside were two items, a digital recorder and a thick envelope. On the recorder, a note read, "Play later." I looked back at Grace. She was watching me, still and steady, her gaze like a lighthouse in the fog. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just another dinner. This was the beginning of something much bigger. I could feel Sophie's small hand trembling in mine. Her eyes were glossy, red with tears that hadn't quite fallen. The room, once buzzing with polite conversation and clinking glasses, had fallen into an uneasy quiet. Every word Margaret had uttered still hung in the air like a bad smell. "You can eat with your hands, can't you?" I glanced around. Most of the family avoided our gaze. Rebecca sat smugly, cutting her food with polished silverware, her children whispering and snickering. Margaret had already returned to sipping her wine, the slight smirk on her lips an echo of satisfaction. But Grace, seated beside us, was perfectly still. Her hand, thin and veined, gently brushed my knee under the table. It was her way of saying, "You're not alone." I breathed in slowly, forcing my pulse to steady. I knew the recorder was now hidden in my lap, its tiny red light glowing faintly. The envelope remained untouched for now. I didn't yet know what was inside, but I trusted Grace. If she had placed it there, it mattered. Across the table, Margaret asked coolly, "Is there a problem? The food's getting cold." I turned to Sophie and smiled gently. "No problem at all," I said. And then, slowly, deliberately, I picked up a piece of turkey with my fingers. I raised it to my mouth and took a bite. "Come on, sweetheart." Sophie hesitated, then followed my lead, reaching for a piece of bread with both hands. Her movements were careful, like a child learning to walk again. She looked at me, searching for reassurance. I gave her a nod. "You're doing just fine," I whispered. "This will be settled. I promise." Rebecca let out a soft laugh, eyes dancing with mockery. "Well, that's certainly rustic." But I noticed a few family members shifting uncomfortably. Uncle Mike, seated a few chairs down, looked particularly pained. After a moment, he leaned toward me and whispered, "You can use my fork. I'll grab another." I shook my head. "We're okay, Uncle Mike. Thank you." Grace's hand moved to rest on mine again. She leaned closer, her voice low and steady. "You're strong, Emily. Don't let them undo that." I nodded, holding back the sting of tears. I wasn't going to give Margaret or Rebecca the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not here, not in front of my daughter. When dessert was served, Margaret made sure to emphasize that the gourmet cake had come from a renowned bakery. She placed the pumpkin pie I had brought aside. "We'll save this for tomorrow's lunch," she said, as if it were a favor. The recorder was still quietly running, tucked beneath the linen napkin on my lap. Every word, every insult and sneer was being preserved, not just for evidence, but as a record of what we endured. Tonight, I wasn't just eating with my hands. I was holding on to my dignity, bite by bite. Later, as the plates were cleared, Grace leaned over again. "Come with me," she said. "Bring Sophie." We followed her slowly toward the guest room. The moment the door shut behind us, Grace turned, her posture straighter, her voice suddenly firm. "You both endured that beautifully," she said. "And now, it's time you understood what this is really about. It's been 3 months since that Thanksgiving dinner, and everything has changed." Grace moved in with us shortly after the confrontation. Her presence filled our home with something we hadn't had in a long time: peace. She helps Sophie with homework, tends to the plants on our windowsill, and spends her afternoons reading by the window with her tea. Our once quiet apartment now echoes with laughter, guitar strumming, thanks to Uncle Mike's lessons, and the sounds of a life slowly being rebuilt. With Grace's support, I finally opened my own accounting practice, Sanders Financial, in a small but bright office downtown. It's modest, but it's mine. Every morning, I walk in with purpose, no longer weighed down by the need to prove myself to people who never saw me for who I was. Sophie is thriving too. She's confident, joyful, and no longer afraid to speak up. Her school essay, In My Family, where she wrote that true family is made of people who care for each other, earned high praise from her teacher. And I've never been prouder. A few days ago, I received a letter from Margaret. It was full of apologies and vague attempts at reconciliation. I'm not ready to respond. Maybe I will be someday. Real change takes time. And for once, I'm in no rush. As we sat together last night, Grace, Sophie, and I, sharing hot chocolate and memories, I realized that the moment I found that recorder under the table, everything began to shift. Not just in the family, but within me. We chose love over shame, truth over silence, dignity over appearances. This is what family looks like now. Thank you for listening to our journey. Subscribe to Life Stories for more real emotional tales of resilience, family, and hope.